Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. I assume you can hear the sound of my voice. If you can't, raise your hand. Of course, that doesn't make sense. If you can't, you would know that I told you to raise your hand. So we'll let that go for now. See if I can find, here we go. All right, I get it. I didn't know that. All right, sorry, it's taking me a couple of minutes to log in. It's been a busy day. And so we're looking for the way too many things here. Just wait a second. All right. A lot of documents. Are you going to chime in on how to make an offer with seller financing is the question. Not necessarily. I mean, if you were going to do seller financing, there's a seller financing addendum, which you would include. And where you would put that would be over here. And you would attach the seller financing addendum. That could be for a later class, how to do seller financing, how to fill out a seller financing addendum, but not for today, right? Basically, if you read the seller financing addendum, it says to the seller, don't do it, something like that. All right, we left off on appraisal as a contingency, and I wanted to start back there because I was running out of time. It was contract interruptus last week. So I wanted to make sure I covered all these different things. So the point about the appraisal is, number one, you have to understand that the property may not appraise for the purchase price. And that's something that if you do not have appraisal as a contingency, you need to warn your client that it may not appraise for the purchase price, and they may have to make up the difference if appraisal is not a contingency. Second, if they say, well, I'm willing to do that, find out what their limit is. If it's 50,000, is it 100,000? What is it? If they say 50,000, right, is the most extra I can be willing to put in, what we would do is say this, we would leave that it's contingent, but what we would do is down here under other terms, we would write something like property appraising. So let's say we're offering 1.3. And the buyer says, I got $50,000 more that I'm willing to throw in, but that's it. So we would say property appraising for a minimum of $1,250,000 is a contingency of this agreement. All right. Now, that's not as good as having no appraisal contingency, but it's better than having an open-ended appraisal contingency. And basically you're saying that would be, if it appraises for at least that, we're cool. But if it appraises lower than that, we're going to need to talk. You're not going to be obligated. That's the kind of wording you would use. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out about the appraisal contingency is, and I know this is probably going to shock some of you, there are sneaky listing agents, a sneaky listing agent. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So we listed a property up in the hills, up in Gilroy. It was a semi-custom home that all the properties in the area were custom built. There's nothing that looks like it. There are really no comparables for this. So what I suggested is that we get an appraisal up front, costs about $600. Now, if we get an appraisal up front and we don't like the price, we don't have to show it to anybody. I'll point out later why that's true. The contract clause that says you have to give the buyer documents does not include an appraisal, and that's because it's an opinion of value and therefore not a material fact that has to be disclosed. But there's sneakiness. That's not the sneaky part, right? So let's say in that case, it appraised for the price we wanted. So what we did then is we made sure that the appraisal was part of the disclosure package we shared with the buyers. Now, this is the question. Let's say the price is 1.5 million, and I'm the listing agent, and I've gotten an appraisal of the property for 1.5 million, and I put that into the disclosure package, and you're representing a buyer, and you've got a copy of that appraisal. So you write an offer. The lender that your buyer chooses, they're not, first of all, you need to understand, they're not going to use the appraisal that I put in the disclosures, right? They're not going to do that. They're going to order their own appraisal. And let's say that that appraisal from Bank of America, right? The Bank of America sent the appraisal management company out to do. Let's say that appraisal is not 1.5 million, but 1,450,000. Now, this is the question. Has the appraisal, and I'm assuming in this case that you have an appraisal contingency. Has the appraisal contingency been met? Now, if you're representing the buyer, you're going to say no, because my buyer is the appraiser for the buyer didn't appraise it at 1.5. But look at the wording of this clause. It says a written appraisal of the property by a licensed or certified appraiser at no less than the purchase price. Does that say it has to be the written appraisal that the buyer's lender has gotten for the transaction? Does it say that? Or does it simply say that all the seller has to do is have a written appraisal? That's all that it says. So technically, if they've done that and it's a relatively recent appraisal by a licensed appraiser, the seller could argue that they have satisfied that contingency, which of course doesn't necessarily help you if you're representing the buyer, because the lender isn't going to go along with it. Now, in order, there's ways we could write it in, but what I'm saying is if the listing agent in the disclosure package has thrown in an appraisal, maybe we want to make it clear in the contract that the appraisal for paragraph I is not the appraisal that's included in the disclosures, but it has to be the appraisal that was hired by the lender for this transaction. I'm just saying. I know some of you are shocked that a listing agent might think of something like that, but I have, and there may be others. The other thing I wanted to say about this, right? I should have mentioned this, last week one of the things that you might want to do if you want to become good at this is, first of all, I would recommend reading aloud the entire contract a couple of times. Right? If there's somebody in your that you know that you want to punish, tell them you need to practice the contract, because what I find, and I think I verified this with other agents, is that even though you're able to read it in your mind, sometimes speaking the words is a little bit different. And if you really want to understand the contract, it wouldn't hurt you to actually say it aloud a couple of times. I'm just saying. The other thing that I would suggest that you do is that if you printed out a copy of the residential purchase agreement, get a couple of highlighters of at least 3 different colors. 3 different colors. take the first one, let's say it's yellow, and what you're going to do is go through the purchase agreement, and we're looking for the phrase buyer shall, right? For example, H, verification of down payment and closing costs, buyer shall. See that? Buyer shall. And everywhere in the contract where it says buyer shall, mark that in yellow. Then take another color. And now you're going to look through the purchase contract for the words seller shall. Seller shall. Highlight them in a different color. Now, when you've done those two things, you basically have highlighted all of the buyer obligations and all of the seller obligations under the contract. But there's a third one. Make it green or red or whatever. And what we're looking for in that one is the phrase a contingency of this agreement or contingent. For example, this agreement is contingent upon the written appraisal. Or everywhere it says is a contingency of the agreement, or see, a contingency of the agreement. You're going to want to mark that. Because what'll happen is that's the list of all the contingencies. And you'll then know where they are in the contract, right? Buyer shalls, seller shalls, contingencies of the agreement. So the loan can be a contingency of the agreement. Now, first of all, this says loan application. You better have that box checked if you're serious about buying a house. I've actually had people say to me, well, you know, the agent didn't want to present my offer because I don't have a pre-approval letter. Can't I give it to them later? We're not in that kind of a market, right? So if as a listing agent, I have no interest in changing the status of my listing from active to pending until I see proof of funds and a pre-approval letter. I'm not going to do it, right? We're not going to change the status and then hope that you're going to get, you know, be pre-approved. I actually had a person who's an experienced real estate agent at a well-known company. I shouldn't mention, but it's called Compass. And he wrote an offer on one of our listings where he said he wanted 15 days to apply with a lender. 15 days just before the buyer was even going to talk to a lender. No, right? So what, you don't have any real business showing homes to people that don't have a pre-approval letter and can't prove that they have the money to close. You understand? You know, maybe your client turns out to be a bankrupt, unemployed, convicted arsonist, right? No one's going to give them a loan, right? And you need to have that up front. But if you don't check that box, it says that there are 3 days buyer shall deliver to seller a letter from buyer's lender. You want that attached, right? Or now, by the way, if the house has been on the market 125 days, we'll take it, right? We'll give you 3 days. By the way, as a listing agent, I typically don't change the status from active to pending until the earnest money deposit is in escrow and until we have proof of funds and a letter from a pre-approval letter. And I've had buyer's agents call me up and say, when are you going to change the status to pending? And I say, when is your buyer putting the money in escrow? Right? When that happens, I change the status to pending, because if the buyer is making an offer on multiple properties, then what they're going to do is not put the deposit into escrow, right? They're not going to do it. And I may have mentioned this last week, but if you want to make your offer look stronger, you tell them on the page 1 that you're going to put the deposit in by the next business day. That way we know, if we're a listing agent, that you're not making offers on a bunch of different properties. But I don't want to change my status just to have you say, well, the buyer decided to buy another property. So anyhow, thank you very much. Now I have to change the status back to active. And then all of the buyer's agents are saying, what happened to your listing? It was pending and now it's not pending. What's wrong with it? You know, I don't want to go there. Right. So you need to have the latter. Loan contingency. Buyer shall act diligently and in good faith to get a loan. Yeah, that would seem like a good idea. Notice it says buyer's contractual obligations regarding deposit Balance of down payment and closing costs are not contingencies of this agreement. So what that means is, let's say you're pre-approved for a loan, but your buyer lied, misrepresented the amount of the assets that they had. So they don't really have the down payment. They don't have closing costs. If I have a loan contingency, does that mean we can get out on the loan contingency? The answer is no. No, the loan contingency is only a contingency about the loan. If you do not have the down payment, closing costs, that is not a contingency, which is why you need to be very careful. That's why verification of down payment and closing costs, you know, I've had buyers say, well, I don't want to give them copies of that. You're not going to be able to buy a house in this market, right? Because I don't want to put it in. You don't want to be writing offers with buyers that don't have enough money to actually close escrow. It's considered a bad practice. So how long is the loan contingency? Now, what you're going to see is that most of the contingencies are tied to paragraph 14B, which we're going to come to. But there are 3 contingencies on this page, and each of them could have different dates than what we put in 14B. For example, appraisal is a contingency. It says 17 days, but we might write in something a little bit less because, again, we would ask the loan agent, how soon can you get an appraisal done? The loan contingency says 21 days. That's a long time. That's a long time. And by the way, you might want your lender to submit the file to desktop underwriting so that you have a better idea. But 21 days is a long time just to figure out whether or not your buyer can actually get a loan. I'm just saying, right? But that's a second date. You might put in 10 or 12. How would you know what number to put in? You have to talk to the loan agent. No loan contingency. Now, if we check that box, we're not saying that we're not having a loan. If we're saying we're not having a loan, then on the first page, we would have checked the box all cash. Now watch what happens when I check all cash. Notice how all of that stuff disappeared. And over here, the no loan contingency box is disappeared. And one of the things that I see that buyers agents want to do is that even if they're making an all cash offer, they want to check the box no loan contingency. No, that's not the way to do it, because that's not what that means, right? All cash doesn't mean no loan contingency. In a practical sense, it does. But when we unclick all cash, notice now we can click no loan contingency. So what we're saying is we need a loan, but we're far enough along in the underwriting process. My guy is solid enough that we do not need to make that a contingency of this agreement. And as a tip, if you, first of all, work with a good loan agent, right? And I can tell from pre-approval letters who's got if you've got a 1-paragraph pre-approval letter, I don't give that very much credit as a listing agent. If you've got a 3-page pre-approval letter from a bank or credit union, now you're talking, because you've really got a pre-approval letter. And if your loan agent knows what they're doing and has done desktop underwriting and says, this is solid, trust me, I can make this a loan, then you could click on the box, no loan contingency. You do need to understand that if you're representing a buyer, you're competing against other buyers on price, terms, or both. So if I'm a listing agent and I'm representing the seller and we have 2 offers and they're both for $800,000 and one of them has a loan contingency and the other one does not have a loan contingency, which one are we probably going to take? Probably the one that doesn't have a loan contingency. Well, how about if the one with a loan contingency was $10,000 more than the one without a loan contingency? Which one would we take? And the answer is probably the one without a loan contingency. You understand how much more, and by the way, this is what I explain to buyers. If we don't do all of this in advance, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars. That's what it's going to cost you when it comes time to buy a home. And that's because we can't compete against offers that are for the same amount that don't have this contingency. right? We can't compete. They'll always go with the one without a loan contingency. We have to overbid all of the other non-loan contingent offers in order to even get their attention so that they'll even pay attention to our offer. Right? That's what we're going to have to do. And it's not going to be $5,000 more, not in this market, not $10,000. Right? I've actually seen it go $80,000 was the difference. And the seller said, this one's a sure thing. I'm making more money than I ever thought I was going to make. That one is iffy. I'm going to go with the one without the loan contingency. Can you remove your loan contingency? You have a good lender, right? A good lender who's done desktop underwriting, submitted it to underwriting. And by the way, the lender doesn't normally do this unless they know you're committed to buying a house and using them as the lender, right? But being able to have no loan contingency means you're in a much stronger position. You even can compete against the all cash offers, right? Because the all cash offers want a discount for being all cash. It's all going to be cash to the seller one way or the other, right? Whether it all comes out of somebody's bank account or it's borrowed from Golden One Credit Union, it's still all cash to the seller. There's just more things that can go wrong with a loan, but if you don't have a loan contingency, then maybe they're solid. We don't need to worry about that. You compete on price, or you compete on terms, or you compete on both, right? And I assume you've heard that it's a tight market and there's oftentimes multiple offers. You need to compete. Lender limits on buyer's credit. Supposing you, because you're a generous real estate agent, are giving a credit to the buyer, and you ask the seller to give a credit to the buyer. Now, the sellers aren't doing a lot of crediting right now because they, frankly, don't have to. But let's say the house has been on the market 120 days, right? Well, now, you can ask for stuff that you won't be able to ask for if it's a hot property that just hit the market. So let's say that between all of the credits that you're giving and that the seller is giving, it's $25,000. But then the lender tells you, hey, there isn't $25,000 of points and things like that, of non-recurring closing costs. There isn't that many. So what the typical buyer wants is, okay, so I can only get $7,000 as credit because that's all I can use. I expect the rest of it to be lower price, part of my down payment. That's not going to happen. What this says is any credit to buyer from any source for closing or other costs that is agreed by the parties shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender. Right? So the first thing you need to do is talk to your loan agent and ask them how much credit can the buyer get on this kind of a loan and use. Then it goes on to say, if the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit shall be reduced to the lender's allowable credit. And in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there will be no automatic adjustment to the purchase price to make up the difference. That's what the contract says. So if the buyer is getting more credit than they can use, they lose the credit that they can't use. Right? Now, if you talk to the lender, sometimes the lender will allow the buyer to pay what's called a discount point, which is prepaid interest that would lower the interest rate. Some lenders allow them to do that. But how much you can use and what you could use it for varies by lender. That's a conversation you have to have with your loan agent. Buyer stated financing is one of my, I don't know, favorite is the right word, one of my, so let's say on the purchase contract, we say all cash, all cash. Now, we can prove that the buyer, in fact, has the cash. That's something you have to have. However, the buyer really doesn't want to use their cash. Can they go ahead and get a loan? And the answer is, yeah. Look at paragraph K. First of all, it says seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, but not limited to as all cash, down payment, contingent or non-contingent loans. So what, for example, forget the all cash versus getting a loan. How about having one loan versus two loans? I see a hand up. I don't know if that means there's a question, but I don't know. Maybe you're just waving at me. But if you have a question, type it in, because and I see the hand is still up. If you have a question, if you could type it in, unless you want me to unmute you, but then things go, all right. Did you want to say something? Well, I don't know. All right, you're gonna have to type it in. Or if you're in my program, reach out to me. I'd be happy to explain this to you. So let's say that we show that we have 20% down, 80% loan. That looks better. Doesn't that look better than saying, well, we really have two loans. There's a first and there's a second, and it's really a 90% loan. So what this paragraph says is seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell buyer in reliance with buyer's covenant. That means an agreement concerning financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the agreement, and the availability of alternative financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close escrow. So this is my reading of that paragraph. No harm, no foul. If you change your mind as to what kind of financing you're going to do while you're in escrow, it's not a big deal as long as you can close on time. As long as you can close on time. And as long as you don't need the seller to do anything special to help you get this additional financing. That's kind of what it says. Now, the question people ask me, well, won't they know? Won't they know that I don't really have 180% loan, but I got two loans? Won't they know that? Yeah. When would escrow know that? When the loan documents hit escrow, which are usually something the buyer is going to sign the day before escrow closes. So is the seller going to say, oh my God, you've got two loans and not one loan, and we don't want you to close escrow tomorrow? They don't really pay any attention to that. So as this says that you're supposed to get the financing that you mentioned on the first page, but do you think buyers have ever changed their mind in escrow? I've had buyers change their mind, and this essentially says that the seller is not obligated to cooperate with this, and you're just obligated to close on time. As long as you can close on time, there's no harm, no foul. So I said there were three potential contingencies on this page. One was appraisal, two was the loan, and the third is the sale of the buyer's property. Now, if that's, by the way, a whole new, its own class. If you check this box that it is contingent upon the buyer selling a property they own, you better have a good story, and it better not be a property with multiple offers that recently came on the market. Again, if it's been on the market 125 days, they'll look at just about anything, right? And then if we click on this and that form loads, and I'll go through all of the addendum after we've gone through the purchase contract, there's different, you have to fill it out properly. So other addendum, if this is a backup offer, we can click that. It launches something else. Short sales, don't worry about that, not yet. Court confirmation, if it's a probate or something like that, we're not doing that. Advisories, probate, trust advisory. So is it a trust property? Now, that's another session when I go through the different advisories, but there are two kinds of trusts. There's what's called a vested trust, and then there's a inter vivos or living trust or family trust. Now, if this is a family trust, then it's treated like a regular real estate transaction. There's no special rules other than people are signing on behalf of the trust rather than as individuals, which loads another document we'll talk about later. If it's a vested trust, and how would you know if it's a vested trust? The answer is because somebody died and the property is in the estate process, right? That's how you know if it's a vested trust. And if it's a vested trust, there's no, you don't get an SPQ, you don't get a TDS, there's a bunch of rules that don't apply. So you could check that box if it says trust. And how would you know that? If you look in Realist or in RPR and you pull up the property, it'll say the name of the Devlin family trust, or it'll say Michael Devlin, comma, TR, which stands for trust. It would say something, you could click on that. But again, it doesn't really matter unless it's a vested trust in terms of what's going to happen. The statewide buyer and seller advisory, should you include that? Well, it depends. What does it depend on? Well, your office probably has a list of documents that they want in the transaction, right? I have 12 different lists for the documents depending on the transaction for the offices that I work with, 12 different ones, because it varies from condominiums to, it just varies. So what you're doing is you've got your list. These are all the documents my office wants. And typically the listing agent is going to provide you a list of disclosures. And so the question is there anything that's on your list that your office wants that's not on the list that of what they're providing you? So for example, if I'm a listing agent, you're going to already have in the disclosures a copy of the statewide buyer and seller advisory. So I don't want you to email me another one. I want you to sign the one we've already signed, right? So whether or not you check that box would depend on whether or not they've given you one. And and this isn't as common, but let's say they say whether you have nothing, right? They haven't done anything, right? There's no property inspection, there's no termite inspection, there's no disclosure package. All they did is list the thing. Well, then you might want to include this because your office probably wants it. Allocation of other terms. What else might we write in here? Let's say you're going to give a credit to your client, right? I'm not passing judgment on that one way or the other, but you would say buyer's agent to credit buyer, and it's better to put in, a dollar amount, right? And you can just say to credit the buyer $15,000, whatever, right? Whatever. That would be something else you could write in here. Generally speaking, you don't want to be writing a lot of stuff in here. What else? What else do I see written in? Buyer's agent is or how about this? Buyer is a licensed real estate agent. So let's say you're writing this for yourself, right? You're writing an offer for yourself. The California Department of Real Estate thinks this isn't a legal thing, but they think you ought to always say that you are a licensed agent. Those are the kinds of things you might want to write in, right? But, other than that, don't write a lot of stuff in there. Closing costs, allocation of costs. All right. So first of all, did the listing agent give you a natural hazard disclosure statement? Yes or no? All right. Now, if they did, then you don't need to do anything in number one. If they didn't, then you might want to do something in number one. It's an obligation of the seller to disclose whether or not the property is located in a fire zone, a flood zone, an earthquake zone, right? It's an obligation, but it's not an obligation for them to pay for it, right? I'm just saying it's not an obligation. And so it's not, these are not very expensive, maybe 100 to 125, 135. You want to make sure that there is an environmental part included. Now, many of the NHDs throw in environmental anyhow, even if you buy their stripped down model, they usually throw in the environmental. And what that shows is the property located to any environmental hazards, right? Which your buyer would probably want to know about. If they haven't provided one and you get a chance to choose, and I didn't pick these, but this was there. I normally we're not writing it in. My recommendation is I always use property ID for the natural hazard disclosure. They have better reports. They have more protection, liability insurance. It's better. But if they give me a JCP report or a disclosure, or I don't fight with it. If they don't have environmental, we want to get it. It's only like $20 as for the environmental. Usually we're not writing anything else in number 2 or number 3. Now, maybe what would we write in? Well, let's say I sold a property last year up in Ben Lomond, well and septic tank. Now, in Santa Cruz County, you got to have I mean, you know, they don't fool around. You got to have a septic inspection and that sort of stuff. But let's say I want the seller has a septic tank. We might want the seller to pay for a septic report. We might want them to pay for a well report. Most of the time, we're not writing in anything in 1, 2, and 3. Let me say that again. Most of the time, we're not writing anything in 1, 2, and 3 because the seller has already given us an NHD, which means we don't need to ask for one. And, you know, we don't need to do it, right? Government requirements and retrofit, this box should be checked, in my opinion. The seller shall pay for smoke alarm, carbon monoxide device installation, water heating and bracing if required by law. Prior to close of escrow, seller shall provide by a written statements of compliance. Unless seller is exempt. Well, who's exempt? Well, remember I talked about the vested trust. Somebody died. It's a probate. It's a trust where somebody died. That is legally exempt from the smoke detector carbon monoxide requirements. However, I'm just telling you this. Your buyer's appraiser will not appraise the property unless it's got the smoke detectors and the carbon monoxide detectors. Even the appraiser doesn't care. You say to the appraiser, well, no, this is an exempt sale, so they don't have to have a carbon monoxide device, and so they don't have to have it. The appraiser is going to say, we're not appraising the property without it. Right, so I've had agents who, when that reality hit them, they drove to Lowe's or Home Depot, bought a carbon monoxide detector, took it over to the property, installed it, took a picture, sent it to the appraiser. 7B2. First of all, some lenders don't like it if you've got boxes in 7B2 checked. Especially, they don't like it because they don't really understand what it is. What is 7B2? It says, who shall pay for the cost of other mandatory minimum government inspections and reports as required to the condition of sale under any law? That's called a point of sale ordinance. A point of sale ordinance. I'm in Santa Clara County, we don't have any, right? We don't have any. Santa Cruz County does. Now, what about the low flow plumbing fixtures and things like that? In most of California, it says that you're supposed to have the low flow stuff, but it's not a point of sale ordinance. In other words, it's not mandatory if you're selling the property. Santa Cruz County, it's mandatory if you're selling the property. They will send a person to look at your toilet and to make sure that it's a low flow toilet. They're going to send somebody out. It's a point of sale ordinance. How would you find out? Let's say you're writing an offer in Pittsburgh, California, Contra Costa County. How would you find out if there are point of sale ordinances? You go to Google, you type in Contra Costa County real estate point of sale ordinances and hit enter. I'll bet you find the answer, right? The Board of Realtors usually knows. Contra Costa County, Alameda County, Santa Cruz County, San Mateo, Santa Clara County all have their advisories that you can use, which says if there are any. Then 7B2, seller shall pay the cost of compliance with other mandatory retrofit standards. Retrofit standards. What's a retrofit standard? Required as a condition of law. Now, retrofit standards, let me see, what is a point of sale ordinance? A point of sale ordinance is a law that says you cannot transfer title to property unless you can prove that you have low flow toilets, low flow plumbing. In Southern California, they have a minimum amount of insulation. It's a retrofit standard. And if you don't have enough insulation in your attic and things like that, you can't sell the house. You can't sell the house unless you upgrade or retrofit the insulation. And they do that to reduce heating and, well, mostly air conditioning expenses down there. Right now, up in Northern California, I don't know of any county that has mandatory retrofits, right? Most of the rules involving mandatory retrofits apply to Southern California. So normally I don't check any of these boxes for 7B2. If you start checking boxes like, if you check the seller box, the seller is going to say, well, I don't know what they are, and I don't want to agree to something, and I don't know what they are. And I asked my listing agent, and he says he doesn't know what they are, so I'm not going to agree to it. If you check buyer shall pay, now the lender is going to say, well, we don't know what they are. We have no idea what you're talking about. And if the buyer has to pay for a whole bunch of extra stuff, if they're going to buy the house, then maybe they won't qualify for the loan. You know, we're not going to do it. Right. So generally, I don't mark anything in 7B2. Escrow and title. Who's going to pay for what? Well, this I just imported it in because I think I've already listed that house in the past. So how do we know who pays for what when it comes to escrow and title? Well, I use Chicago title transfertax.com. That's the URL, Chicago title transfertax.com. My Chicago rep is Lynn Dang. Right? But anybody can access this. And sometimes agents say, well, my title company gave me a PDF as to who pays what. I don't carry around PDFs, right? My phone doesn't like PDFs as much. I can read them, but it's a bit, this is a website. So Oakland is in Alameda County. Now, what this is going to tell me is there a county transfer tax? There's always a county transfer tax, and every county, the default is the seller pays. However, notice in the city of Alameda, it's split 50-50. Only in the city, and by the way, if you go through here, some counties, but most of the time the seller pays. But this tells you. Is there a city transfer tax in Oakland? Apparently there is. It's on the list. But let's say the house is in Alameda County, but it's in Fremont. Fremont doesn't have a city transfer tax. Right? How do I know that? I went here and I looked. And it tells me that in Alameda County, it's a buyer pay county. Right? And then Alpine County, you understand? It's irritating to listing agents. We have a listing in Contra Costa County, and we get an offer from an agent in Sacramento County, and the agent has messed up who pays for what. It's just irritating, right? It's just irritating. So before you fill this out, you might want to take a peek at customarily who pays what. So if we're going to continue with the Oakland example, buyer and buyer. Escrow holder shall be. Well, if the buyer is paying for escrow and title, don't I, as the buyer's agent, get to pick the escrow and title company? If you do that, your offer will probably not be accepted, and at best you're going to be countered because the listing agent has already opened escrow. Who picks the title company? Who picks the escrow company? The short answer is the listing agent does. So what do I do if I don't know? I don't know. I type in seller. You can see I've done this before. Seller's choice. Buyer shall pay, issued by seller's choice. I always thought it'd be great. I was going to think of creating my own title company, and I was going to call it seller's choice, right? Because I don't know. Anyhow, so you're going to look ChicagoTitleTransferTax.com, or if your title company has a website, I want something I can access on a phone easily, so I know who pays what, and you want to put that in here. You don't want to look like an amateur, and just because you're in Santa Clara County and you're writing it. By the way, if I'm in Santa Clara County, which is a seller pay county, and this has happened, I get offers from agents from Alameda County, and they've marked buyer pays, because in Alameda County, the buyer pays. I'm not going to counter that if I'm the listing agent. I'm not going to counter it. I'm just going to be telling the seller, hey, we just saved you some money. The idiot from Alameda County doesn't realize that this is a county where the seller pays and the buyer is paying. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Right? The only time you'll hear from me is if you're asking my client to pay for something they're not supposed to. Okay, right? Check it out. Other costs. Typically, the seller is going to pay the transfer tax. Yes, I know there are some weird areas in little cities where it's not true. That's why you have to look. What if there's a city transfer tax? Typically, it's split. And the way I would write it in is split 50-50. Some agents just check both boxes thinking that that means that it's split 50-50. Why not 60-40? I don't know, but I always put that in. Is there a homeowner association? A good question. If there is, the seller should pay the transfer fee. Seller should pay document preparation fee. Private transfer fees, what are they? They don't exist very much. They would typically be on a prelim, and it would say, oh my God, am I saying you should read a prelim before you write an offer? Maybe. But there aren't very many private transfer fees. Some subdivisions, because they were negotiating with the government or somebody like that, that they have every time a house is sold in the subdivision, there's a fee that goes to somebody, but that would show up in a prelim. Normally there isn't one, but then, look at the prelim. There's more buyer and seller shall pay. We don't usually write anything in here. Now we've come to the home warranty. The home warranty. Now you could check the box and say we don't want one. You could, is it a buyer or seller pay? Now, if it's my listing, I typically want what's called seller's coverage, which means I want the home warranty to start during the listing period, right? When I talk about listing a house, I talk about that. And that's so if something breaks during the listing period, it'll be fixed, right? And then if that's true, you're kind of stuck because I already have a home warranty that I'm going to be giving to the buyer. But typically, this is what I would see. Seller shall pay not to exceed how much? I don't know. One of the things you need to know is the different home warranties. Who is going to provide it? I just type in buyer's choice. So even if I'm letting the seller pay for it, I want, as the buyer's agent, to pick it. Who cares? Well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons as a listing agent I want seller's coverage is, first of all, so the seller is covered during the listing period, but there's a second, more insidious reason. Because I want your buyer to have the home warranty that I picked out, and I'm going to pick out a good one, right? I'm not saying it's going to be a cheap schlocky kind of a home warranty. It'll be a normal home warranty. But this is what is important about it. If I, as the listing agent, pick the home warranty company, the home warranty company is going to be sending marketing information to your buyer that has my name and phone number on it, because I picked the home warranty company. If you pick the home warranty company, then they're going to be sending marketing material to your buyer with your name on it. Which would you rather have? The listing agent's name on the home warranty, so that the buyer is thinking, oh, that nice listing agent got me a home warranty? Or would you rather your name be on the home warranty? That's why it can be important who picks the home warranty. The title companies have they all have home warranty companies or something like that. I would be sure that you get to pick. And by the way, and many times I paid for a home warranty or done that for my buyer. If I'm buying a home warranty for my buyer, I want the platinum policy. I want the upgraded policy. I want the policy that covers everything. And the reason, if I'm buying it, if I'm the buyer's agent and I'm buying a home warranty for my buyer, I do not want the cheap home warranty package. Because what'll happen is their air conditioning will go on the fritz, right? And they'll call the home warranty company up, and the home warranty company will say, oh, just a moment, let me look. Oh, no, you're not covered for that. You see, your agent ordered you just the basic package. So no, you're not covered. You're gonna have to pay for that. How does that look, right, to you, right? What kind of feelings is your client going to have for you, knowing that you bought them the cheap package? What I want is that if I give my buyer a home warranty and something breaks, they are covered, so that I get the credit for picking a good home warranty company. If there's air conditioning, I want to cover it. And if there's a pool and spa, you might want to cover it. I want the upgraded, I want the good plan, because I don't want my buyer to say, you cheap so-and-so, you bought the cheap home warranty and it isn't doing us any good. Thanks a lot, right? If you don't want the seller to pay, you just want to handle it outside of escrow. And by the way, you check this box. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get the buyer a home warranty, right? By the way, most errors and omissions insurance company will lower the amount of your deductible if you're ever sued, if there's a home warranty on the property. Why would they do that? Well, because there's less likelihood that the buyer is going to sue us if something breaks and it's easily fixed, right? So if you check the buyer waives it says nothing in this paragraph precludes buyer from purchasing a home warranty during the term of this agreement. It just means we're not putting it in the contract as something the seller is going to do, right? May have been more than you ever wanted to know about home warranties. Items excluded in the sale. We're going to do probably this paragraph, because there's a lot of fun stuff in this paragraph, and then we'll call it, it'll be Miller time. So agents, the MLS says you're going to get the patio furniture, right? That's what the MLS says. Does that mean your buyer is going to get the patio furniture? No, not necessarily. Notice what it says here in 8A. Items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, flyers, or marketing materials are not, notice they've highlighted the word not, included in the purchase price. They are not included in the purchase price. They are not excluded from the sale either. In other words, this is saying that this paragraph, paragraph 8, is the paragraph that says what the buyer is going to get. Doesn't matter what the flyer says. It doesn't matter what the MLS says. I see agents stapling copies of the MLS saying you've got to give us that because it's in the MLS. No, we don't, right? No, we don't, because it's not in the contract. So what is included? All existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property. Attached. existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing and heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, solar powder systems, built-in appliances, window and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers and conditioners, pool spa equipment, garage door openers, remote controls, mailbox, in-ground landscaping, trees, shrubs, water features, fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, security systems, alarms, and then there's the following. That pretty much says it all. How about, so fireplace, the grill in front of the fireplace, the little holder that's got, you know, like the little brush and the poker and the shovel, is that included? Is that included? And the answer is no, that's not included, right? It says fireplace inserts, but that's not the screen in front of the fireplace, and it's not the little tools that you get. How about patio furniture? How about patio furniture? Is that on the list anywhere? I don't see it. I don't see it on the list. How about in the garden in the back, they have a bench in the garden where you can sit and sip tea and sit in your garden, watch the birds. Is that included? Not on the list. Not on the list. So if, as a buyer's agent, you don't want to be buying, and by the way, I believe that if we were to sit outside of Home Depot or Lowe's looking for people coming out with fireplace screens and the fireplace tools and patio furniture and garden furniture, and they are wearing business casual attire, and we stopped them and said, I'm curious, what do you do for a living? Real estate agent is going to come up more often than our percentage of the population. Why? Because the buyer moved in and that stuff is gone and the buyer expected to get it. And they're complaining, what happened to the bench in the backyard? It's not there, right? I have bought backyard benches for people, right? So you might want, now, does that mean you couldn't throw them in? Yeah, but you better write them down. This is a paragraph that would be good for you to be familiar with, right? Because I named several things that, how about the blinds, drapes, things like that? Okay, blinds, yes, right, that's on the list, right? It says that someplace here. That's on the list, but sometimes there's decorative things, a valance or something like that on top. That's not on the list, not on the list. So you need to be familiar with it. Are there stoves going to be included? Look at what the MLS says. Refrigerators, washer and dryers. Is there anything else that is patio furniture? Is there anything else? If it is, write it in. Write it in. Paragraph 4, existing integrated phone and home automation systems, including components such as internet connected devices, are included, right? Here's where most of the fun comes from: leased or liened items. Solar panels. Is that a good thing? Having solar panels? Yeah, sure. They'll be making money on the electricity, selling it back to PG&E. It'll be great. All right, so it's possible that the seller owns the solar panels, right? It's possible. But more likely, the seller is leasing the solar panels. And by the way, you can tell in the prelim, because what the solar panel company is going to do is record the lease essentially as it's called a fixture, right? It'll be a recorded fixture against the property. And what does it say about this? Seller shall, there we go, disclose to buyer if any item or system specified in 8B or otherwise included in the sale is leased, not owned by the seller, or subject to a lien or encumbrance, and deliver to the buyer all written materials such as the lease warranty concerning such items. Buyer's ability to assume any such lease or willingness to accept the property subject to any such encumbrance is a contingency in favor of buyer and seller. That's the only place I've found in the purchase agreement where there is a contingency for both the buyer and the seller. It's usually a buyer contingency or a seller's contingency. So what's the issue here? First of all, let's say it's a 20-year solar panel lease and we're 10 years into it. Almost all of those leases have provisions that say you can't terminate, right? If you do, you got to pay us. Sometimes it says $8,000, sometimes $10,000, sometimes it says you don't get out. You got to pay us every nickel that you would have paid us if you'd kept the lease. So what sometimes happens is your buyer will Google search the name of the solar panel company and find out that they do not have very good reviews. Most of them don't have very good reviews. And so solar panels are getting better every year and cheaper every year. And this house has 10-year-old solar panels. You understand what may happen? Your buyer might say, I don't want them, right? I want solar panels, but Tesla has solar panels. I want to get something. I want my solar panels to match my car. I want Tesla solar panels, right? I want something cool. Well, that could be a problem because somebody is going to have to pay the solar company to get rid of that lease, And by lien, there's something called a PACE loan, which is used to buy solar panels and things like that. That's a whole nother subject, but those kind of liens are called super priority liens, which means it has to be paid off before escrow can close, not paid off from escrow proceeds, but paid off before escrow can close. And there may be $30,000 of an outstanding PACE loan, and somebody has to pay that before we can close escrow, right? It's a problem. Solar panels can be a problem, particularly if they are old solar panels that have been leased or has a lien on it. Seller shall represent that all items in the purchase price are owned by the seller and shall be transferred free and clear of encumbrances. Items excluded from the sale, this is where you could type in, I want to keep my Tiffany chandelier, I want to keep my, whatever, right? Generally we're not writing things in here, and it explains that brackets attached to the walls, floors, and ceilings, furniture, or whatever, shall remain with the property, right? And so if they have a big screen TV, they're supposed to leave the brackets. If you don't want them to leave the brackets, you check the box and you tell them, get rid of your brackets, get rid of them, right? Now they have to repair the holes, but they don't have to paint it, right? Now your client may say, I don't care, I want to paint it anyhow. Or you can just remove the brackets yourself. All right, paragraph 8, we finished that. It's time for us to, our time is done for today. I know you're feeling terrible about that. I certainly do. Next week, we're going to start on paragraph 9. A lot of this is going to go quicker until we get to 10, 12, and 14, and then we'll spend a little time. Some of the paragraphs, there's not a lot to write in. This has been most of the juicy stuff. That's all I got for today. Thank you all for participating, and stay safe out there. Stay healthy, stay safe, and see y'all later.